From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
All of this with the global warming and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay?
With just 3 weeks before a climate change denier becomes president of the United States, scientists are scrambling to preserve decades of government studies on global warming. We'll speak with a member of the Data Refuge Project at the University of Pennsylvania and the founder of the Internet Archive, Brewster Kahle. The archive just announced plans to mirror its site in Canada to protect itself from the new administration. Then to Donald Trump and the bomb. Will the president-elect start a new nuclear arms race? We'll speak with arms control expert Joe Cirincione, author of Nuclear Nightmares. Plus, we look at what was once called the crime of the century.
Someone had passed America's atomic bomb secrets to Russia. This was an undisputed fact that the whole world knew. The federal government had laid the crime at the doorstep of 2 native New Yorkers, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg.
More than 60 years after their execution, the Rosenberg case is still stirring controversy and debate. Julius and Ethel's sons are now asking President Obama to exonerate their mother, as a new report shows Ethel was executed because she refused to cooperate with the government to help convict her husband. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In breaking news, Russian President Vladimir Putin said today Syria's government has agreed to a ceasefire with rebels set to begin at midnight tonight. Putin said Russia and Turkey would guarantee terms of the truce and that the deal excludes fighters with ISIS, the self-proclaimed Islamic State. It was not immediately clear which of the dozens of rebel groups fighting the regime of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad would take part in any truce. Claims of a truce came as the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 40 people, including children, were killed in airstrikes targeting rebel-held suburbs of Damascus. Amateur video purports to show the aftermath of the attacks, with children and adults seen fleeing through smoke-filled streets. In Washington, D.C. Wednesday, Secretary of State John Kerry blasted Israel's government, saying in a major address that the relentless expansion of Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank threatens Israel's democracy and has all but ended the prospect of a two-state solution with the Palestinians.
Despite our best efforts over the years, the two-state solution is now in serious jeopardy. The truth is that trends on the ground, violence, terrorism, incitement, settlement expansion, and the seemingly endless occupation, they are combining to destroy hopes for peace on both sides and increasingly cementing an irreversible one-state reality that most people do not actually want.
Secretary Kerry's speech followed intense Israeli criticism of the U.S. for refusing to veto a UN Security Council resolution last week. The measure condemns Israel's expansion of settlements, a flagrant violation of international law. Kerry insisted the U.S. had not abandoned its longtime ally, but said Israeli democracy will not survive under a single state.
Here is a fundamental reality. If the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both. And it won't ever really be at peace.
In the West Bank, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said he was willing to resume peace talks in exchange for a halt to settlement construction. This is the chief Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Erekat.
Mr. Netanyahu knows very well that he has the choice, settlements or peace. He can't have both. Settlements are illegal under international law. Settlements are a flagrant violation to international law. Settlements are the antidote for the two-state solution.
In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's reaction to John Kerry's speech was swift and harsh.
But now I must express my deep disappointment with the speech today of John Kerry, a speech that was almost as unbalanced as the anti-Israel resolution passed at the UN last week. Israel looks forward to working with President-elect Trump and with the American Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, to mitigate the damage that this resolution has done and ultimately to repeal it.
Donald Trump took to Twitter to blast Kerry's speech, writing in a pair of tweets, "We cannot continue to let Israel be treated with such total disdain and disrespect. They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal, and now this UN. Stay strong, Israel. January 20th is fast approaching," Trump tweeted. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers in both parties blasted Kerry's address. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham called it delusional, while New York Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer said Kerry had, quote, emboldened extremists on both sides. Donald Trump's transition team said Wednesday it was considering whether to begin privatizing the Veterans Administration. The so-called public-private option would allow veterans to skip treatment at VA hospitals, giving them funds to visit private sector hospitals and clinics instead. Veterans groups, including the American Legion and Vietnam Veterans of America, say they'll oppose any efforts to privatize the VA. In Washington, D.C., the Obama administration is expected to announce new sanctions against Russia today over its alleged role in hacking U.S. institutions, including the emails of Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. Lawmakers and U.S. intelligence officials have repeatedly said Russian hackers helped Donald Trump's campaign defeat Hillary Clinton, but have not provided specific evidence. In Iraq, U.S. warplanes launched airstrikes on Mosul today as the Iraqi army fought to reclaim the city from ISIS. Hundreds of residents poured out of the city's eastern neighborhoods to escape the violence.
We fled the Quds neighborhood to escape the mortars. Mortars would constantly fall on us. The situation there was difficult. Everything is expensive. We were starving.
Iraqi security forces are screening the displaced residents and busing them to camps east of Mosul. But many camp residents say cold and wet weather has made conditions so miserable they're desperate to leave. As many as 1 million people remain trapped inside Mosul with increasingly limited access to food and drinking water. In Colombia, lawmakers have approved a law granting amnesties to some members of the FARC guerrilla group. This is Fernando Cristo, Colombia's interior minister.
It means that the path is clear to guarantee the demobilization of disarmament of FARC members in the first quarter of next year. It is no more and no less than the end of a 52-year conflict with the FARC. The FARC's abandonment of arms is now in the hands of the United Nations, so that the entire process of implementing the accords can begin.
The law will not protect FARC members who committed war crimes or human rights violations. It follows a historic peace accord that formally ended a civil war that left 250,000 Colombians dead. In New Jersey, an 8-year-old boy is fighting to rejoin his Cub Scout pack after he was kicked out because he was born a girl. The case of Joe Maldonado of Secaucus appears to be the first to challenge a ban on transgender boys joining Boy Scout troops. The case follows years of resistance by the Boy Scouts of America to allow gay and lesbian adult leaders before the organization finally dropped a blanket ban in July of 2015. In a statement, a spokesperson for the Boy Scouts said no youth may be removed from any of our programs on the basis of his or her sexual orientation. Gender identity isn't related to sexual orientation, they said. In Texas, the Fort Worth Police Department faces new charges of racism and excessive force after the release of a video showing an officer shooting a black man in the back. 33-year-old David Colley was left paralyzed after the encounter in July. Colley's lawyer, Nate Washington, released a copy of a dash cam video on Wednesday showing a Fort Worth police officer and a local sheriff's deputy opening fire mere seconds after leaving their car. This is Nate Washington.
We know that the officers have indicated that they were telling Mr. Colley to come to them, to walk to them. They were telling him to take your hands out of your pockets, things of that sort. And so as he attempted to comply, raise his hands as they told him to, they shot him.
Colley spent 61 days in a hospital, handcuffed to his bed, and was left permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Washington said the officers were off duty at the time of the shooting. Police initially accused Colley of pointing a box cutter at the officers, but the video does not appear to back up the claim. A grand jury declined to indict Colley on aggravated assault charges. A Fort Worth police spokesperson says an investigation remains ongoing, and a case against the officer has not yet been presented to a separate grand jury. The release of the video came less than a week after a viral video showed an African-American mother and her teenage daughters being violently arrested by a white Fort Worth officer after the woman herself had dialed 911 to report an assault on her 7-year-old son. In Florida, activists opposing construction of the Sabal Trail natural gas pipeline are holding a series of protests across the state today. Environmentalists say the $3 billion 500-mile pipeline threatens the Florida aquifer, which supplies drinking water to about 10 million people. Water protectors have set up 4 camps along the pipeline's route, from which they're organizing resistance to the project. Meanwhile, in West Texas, activists say they're preparing to establish a protest camp in the path of the Trans-Pecos pipeline, which would carry natural gas under the Rio Grande River on the U.S.-Mexico border. The Trans-Pecos pipeline is being built by Energy Transfer Partners, the company constructing the Dakota Access Pipeline, which has faced months of resistance from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and over 200 indigenous nations from across the Americas in North Dakota. President Barack Obama Wednesday created a new national monuments in the Southwest. The order will preserve some 1.3 million acres in Utah that are home to Native American sacred sites. In a first, the monument will be co-managed by the federal government and 5 tribes. Obama also set aside 300,000 acres of Nevada desert as the Gold Butte National Monument. The land abuts the ranch of Cliven Bundy, who led an armed standoff against U.S. agents in 2014 after he allegedly allowed his cattle to graze on federally managed land without paying grazing fees. And famed Hollywood actress Debbie Reynolds died Wednesday of a stroke, just one day after the death of her daughter, actress Carrie Fisher. Reynolds was 84 years old. In 1952, Debbie Reynolds had her breakout role in the musical comedy Singin' in the Rain. She was nominated for an Academy Award for her work in 1964's The Unsinkable Molly Brown. Reynolds' son, Todd Fisher, said his mother was heartbroken over his sister Carrie Fisher's death on Tuesday. He reported Reynolds' last words as, "I miss her so much. I want to be with Carrie." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. In just over 3 weeks, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the next president. According to the Sierra Club, Trump will be the only world leader who still denies the science behind climate change. During the presidential campaign, the Sierra Club produced this ad highlighting some of Trump's comments.
All of this with the global warming and that, a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay?
They said that you called climate change a hoax. Is that true?
Well, I might have. I believe that climate change is not man-made. We're going to cancel the Paris Climate Agreement. Our president is worried about global warming. What a ridiculous situation.
Following his election, Donald Trump has nominated a number of climate change deniers for top posts, including Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State, Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt to head the Environmental Protection Agency, former Texas Governor Rick Perry to head the Energy Department, and Congressman Ryan Zinke to become Interior Secretary. Now, scientists at federal agencies are expressing growing concern that the new administration may attempt to destroy or bury decades of scientific studies on climate change. Senior Trump advisor Bob Walker has already proposed stripping funding of NASA's climate research, describing it as, quote, politically correct environmental monitoring.
In a scramble to protect existing government climate data, campaigns have launched to copy and preserve decades of government-sponsored climate research. A guerrilla archiving event was just held at the University of Toronto in an attempt to save the climate studies on servers outside the United States. Organizers in the U.S. are planning additional events in the coming weeks to archive vulnerable government websites and databases that contain climate research. This comes as the end-of-term Web Archive, a project administered by the Internet Archive, gets underway. The project captures and saves U.S. government websites at risk of changing or disappearing altogether at the end of presidential administrations. In the wake of Trump's election, the Internet Archive has announced it'll be moving a copy of its archive to Canada. For more, we're joined by two guests. Lori Allen is with us, Assistant Director for Digital Scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries and a member of the Data Refuge Project to rescue climate and environmental data. And Brewster Kahle joins us. He is a computer engineer, internet entrepreneur, activist, and digital librarian, the founder of the Internet Archive. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Lori Allen, why don't you start out by explaining what you're doing to preserve climate change research and why you're so concerned it might be erased from government websites?
Thank you. So what we're doing in the Data Refuge effort, it's a really large collaborative effort with including the Internet Archive and, as you mentioned, the folks in Toronto, as well as researchers, scholars, librarians, citizens, scientists from many different places, basically creating safe channels for data that is currently stored and made accessible through federal websites and through the federal government to move to new locations so that we can continue to ensure access to these facts for research. It's also an effort to raise awareness of the value of this data and of how data is preserved and shared today. So basically what we're doing is holding events. There'll be one in Philadelphia, January 13th and 14th, where we'll use protocols that are appropriate to the data that we're trying to save. So for as much as possible, we'll move to the Internet Archive through the End-of-Term Harvest Project. And then for other kinds of data, we'll move to trusted repositories here in the US and around the world to make sure that we continue to provide access to them.
Lori Allen, could you say a little bit more about the kind of data you're looking to archive? The main concern is not documents, but rather the analytics software that may become obsolete with disuse. Could you explain the significance of such software to climate research?
Absolutely. I think as we've talked to scientists and researchers who rely on federal climate data, so many of them use a variety of sources. So there are one of the big challenges is in figuring out ways to preserve and continue to provide access to the data themselves, but also the software used to analyze those data. The scientists rely on data in multiple forms, and so we're identifying protocols that we hope will be appropriate to each, whether it's the software used to create derivative versions of the data that are more useful for various purposes, or to, if possible, save the software themselves or the software itself. It's a really sticky problem, and to the extent I think that we can work with the Internet Archive, we are. But as you mentioned, there are data that just can't be scraped, that can't be copied using web archiving, and so for those, it's basically going to have to be a case-by-case basis, which is why so many of the events are engaging with developers and software engineers in collaboration with scientists and librarians and archivists to sort of identify those materials that are most vulnerable, that are most valuable, and take them, one at a time and figure out how we can continue to provide access to them.
I wanted to bring Brewster Kahle into this conversation, founder of the Internet Archive, which is such an important public resource. I mean, everything to the Wayback Machine, where you can find the previous iterations of websites. Every presidential term that's over have been running the end-of-term archive to ensure that what's preserved, the information of a presidential administration is preserved when it changes over, like we see from Obama to Trump. But what about Obama to Trump? Do you see a special threat now when it comes to preserving information?
This administration, or the upcoming administration, has promised radical change, even potentially canceling whole departments. So the services that those departments have traditionally served are now online and could be deleted, changed, modified in ways that we really don't know what's coming up. So where we've always gone and preserved paper records, which has provided some level of preservation, these digital is a new aspect, and it goes much beyond, just like the previous speakers just said, beyond just recording web pages. We need the whole databases and the structures that science now depends on. But it's now within a administration that we're really not sure what's coming up.
And Brewster Kahle, could you explain what exactly happens when there's a change in administration? Your end-of-term archive keeps all of the information that was previously in a particular administration's website, but what exactly changes? Is everything from .gov sites removed?
Things like the whole whitehouse.gov site, of course, just disappears. And so anybody accessing any of the press releases or any of the information that used to be on that will get broken links. There are some of the browser manufacturers are starting to point to the Wayback Machine, which we encourage, to be able to continue to find information that used to be on those sites. But it's now beyond just that. It's also social media feeds that can be manipulated and changed retroactively, which is done all the time now by a very media-savvy upcoming administration. So I think we will see more control of the message, especially through the digital channels, and that makes archives and libraries and permanent access even more important.
Explain what the Wayback Machine is, Brewster.
The Wayback Machine operates by crawling the World Wide Web, and actually with many, many partners crawling the World Wide Web and adding those into the Internet Archive's collections. And those collections become something that from archive.org you can type in a URL or search to go and find a website to be able to then see the web as it was and surf the web as it was. You could see President-elect Trump 2008 and 2012 election websites, or Hillary Clinton's old Senate websites. So these websites are now available again as they were, but they're just pictures of web pages. So they're not the services behind it. They're not the databases that climate scientists need that are currently being used, of NOAA, NASA's data sets that have services on them. We would love to go and make it so that we're not taking snapshots of websites, but whole web services get archived such that they can be used as they were in 2016. So we're calling out to federal website masters, webmasters, to go and work with us to archive the whole working systems themselves in snapshot form.
And this whole issue of climate change and the Trump administration, Donald Trump, a climate change denier. What in particular are you doing? And if you can talk about moving, well, not exactly moving, but mirroring Internet Archive in Canada, why you're doing that.
So there are groups that are collecting the web FTP sites now. They're going in and trying to do special scripts to go and download all of the different data records that are in these databases. There's groups in Toronto where there's going to be a hackathon at the Internet Archive on January 7th to try to help tour through the important parts of the federal record that we can then make a record outside of the government to make sure that it's permanently available. Then we need to do beyond that, we need to move it to other countries, because the history of libraries is one of loss. Usually libraries are burned, like the Library of Alexandria in ancient times, and they're burned by governments. They're just the new guys don't want the old stuff around. They're often sorry about it tens or hundreds of years later, but if you didn't make a copy, then it's just gone. So the idea of having multiple copies keeps stuff safe.
Well, Laurie Allen, during the last climate change denying administration, that of George Bush, some of the changes that occurred are that the State Department removed climate change from its list of global issues, and the EPA's pages on global warming and climate change research stopped being updated. Now, do you anticipate worse happening under the Trump administration?
I think I'll also point out that the Bush administration did also closed or attempted to close some EPA libraries all over the country. I think we know that people are concerned. I think there's good reason to be tremendously concerned. My partners on this project in the Program for Environmental Humanities at Penn have been talking to so many scientists who are deeply concerned. And I think the important point is better to be safe than sorry. We have, there's, as Brewster just said, lots of copies keep stuff safe. It's a kind of a good rule, and it is the role of all of us to make sure that this material continues to be available. And so, yes, we're concerned, but more than that, it's just wise to take steps to make sure that whatever happens, these important facts remain available to future researchers.
Brewster Kahle, if you could go back to mirroring your website in Canada, why you've chosen to go there. Canada has just announced that access to high-speed internet is a fundamental right. And also, how do you stop your own databases now, your own servers, from being hacked?
So how do we stop things from getting hacked? I think it's copies, really, and putting them on other sides of fault lines, whether it's earthquakes or hard drives failing or institutional failure or law changes, regime change. So Canada is warm to digital libraries in many ways that the United States is becoming potentially less so. So the idea of having multiple legs to the stool. We looked at the television archive, so we will record all of television at the Internet Archive to find out what the Trump campaign promises had been, and things like closing part of the Internet up or threatening to freedom of the press, going and actively saying, hating journalists. All of these are the things that libraries are built on. The idea of having ongoing access to information, historical information. These are what makes libraries work. And so let's just plan for whatever might happen. And who knows, maybe it's going to be just a dry run and we never needed to do it, but it's a good idea in any case.
Well, thanks to the Wayback Machine, we can still read the Mike Pence for Congress site from 2001, which is no longer available via the public web. In one section, Pence's page reads, quote, "Congress should oppose any effort to recognize homosexuals as a discrete and insular minority entitled to the protection of anti-discrimination laws similar to those extended to women and ethnic minorities. Congress should support the reauthorization of the Ryan White Care Act only after completion of an audit to ensure that federal dollars were no longer being given to organizations that celebrate and encourage the types of behaviors that facilitate the spreading of the HIV virus. Resources should be directed towards those institutions which provide assistance to those seeking to change their sexual behavior." Brewster Kahle, could you talk about that and other comparable sites that would no longer be available if this resource were not there?
Certainly. The campaign promises that have been made in the past or policies and the like can be changed by anybody that controls the current website. So those who control the present control the past. And as Orwell has warned, those who control the present control the future. So we really need to make sure there's a record of these things. So Pence has made those go away. There have been Trump within a day of of getting control of .gov. They put up websites going and trumpeting Trump properties that were taken away very quickly, and so there's actively managing what it is people can see on the World Wide Web. So the archive.org is a free resource for being able to see what was on those websites before. We've seen press releases change. George W. Bush announced from the aircraft carrier, and the headline read from the press release, that combat operations in Iraq had ceased. And then a couple months later, it changed to saying major combat operations had ceased. And then a couple years after that, even during the still same administration, they removed the press release altogether. So I'm not sure what is more Orwellian, not telling you that you've changed a previous press release or making it go away altogether. But unless we have libraries, we wouldn't know any of that happened.
Shortly after Michael Flynn was nominated to be President Trump's national security advisor, he deleted a tweet he'd posted referring to false allegations about Hillary Clinton. However, the tweet from November 2nd was preserved on the Internet Archive. It reads, quote, "You decide. NYPD blows whistle on new Hillary emails, money laundering, sex crimes with children, etc. Must read." Explain what you did with this and go to the bigger issue you explained about social media and how this is a new, really, area for you to archive.
So the Internet Archive, working with partners, have been archiving tweets, YouTube, Instagram, these different platforms. Facebook makes it very difficult, unfortunately, to go and record what it is that has been said and now potentially later deleted. All these things are deleted at some point. The companies go under or whatever. And so going and keeping a record of these pronouncements. There are now 10,000 official government Twitter channels. So we archive those. But we also do the ones from the campaigns and surrogates and the like to be able to make rich data sets and making those available now back to researchers so that we can know what it is that was promised. Television, for instance, is very difficult to access, but on tv.archive.org, another free resource, you can search based on what people said, including Democracy Now!, and be able to retrieve clips and to put into your blogs and be able to think critically about what has happened. If you can't quote, compare, and contrast, then it just flows over and you say, wait a minute, I think I remember, but you don't really remember. So the key thing is to be able to quote, compare, and contrast. And libraries are there to preserve a permanent record of things that are often ephemeral, like television, Twitter, websites, and the like. And it's a growing importance.
Brewster Kahle, finally, do you see an existential threat, a unique threat to the information on the Internet today? And to your own Internet Archive, which is really everyone's.
The Internet is I think, just an amazing experiment in sharing and mutual trust. And people are putting their ideas out there in the very public forum. And unless we go and ensure that that trust is warranted, if we don't see too much spying, so people will run away from it thinking that they're going to get in trouble for it. These are very important things that have made the World Wide Web possible in the first place. And it's maybe hard to remember, but it used to be very difficult to get this type of information. Some of the government records might go into the National Archives after an administration changed, and then you'd have to wait 6 months, 12 months to be able to then even make a request for one document at a time. But now we have the opportunity to be able to see what's changed, what the development are, but also enjoy the benefits of enormous taxpayers' funding towards building databases around climate change, weather data. That's much more available than it ever was before. Let's keep that going. Let's continue to build on the trust that has been the hallmark of the World Wide Web. We just need libraries and archives, academics, people that are working in federal websites that may be displaced over as changes in administration happen, to work together to make permanent what it is the taxpayers have paid for.
We want to thank you very much for being with us. Brewster Kahle, founder of the Internet Archive, and Laurie Allen at the University of Pennsylvania Data Refuge Project. This is Democracy Now! Next up, we look at Donald Trump and the bomb. Is he starting a new nuclear arms race? Stay with us. Gazing quickly, and we walk here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
A leading arms control organization is calling for President Obama to take U.S. nuclear missiles off high alert before President-elect Donald Trump assumes office. The Plowshares Fund has circulated a public petition urging President Obama to place restraints on the incoming president's ability to launch a nuclear attack. Last week, President-elect Trump alarmed nuclear weapons experts when he raised the prospect of a new global arms race on Twitter, saying he would increase the size of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Trump's tweet read, quote, "The United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes," end quote. The United States and Russia account for 93% of the world's nuclear arsenal. Following Trump's tweet, his spokesman, Sean Spicer, tried to clarify Trump's position in an interview with CNN. He was speaking to Alison Camerota.
He is going to do what it takes to protect this country. And if another country or countries want to threaten our safety or sovereignty, he's going to do what it takes.
Sure, but he's not waiting until another country threatens us. He's making these proclamations.
He's making it very clear. No, right,
it.
but he's making it very clear that other countries and other companies, you've seen with Carrier and other, he's going to make it clear that he will be an active president that will get things done.
Meaning he will use nuclear weapons if need be.
He will not take anything off the table.
So that's Trump's spokesperson, Sean Spicer, speaking last week on CNN with Alison Camerota. Well, to talk more about Trump's comments, we go to Washington, D.C. to speak with Joe Cirincione, president of the Plowshares Fund, which has circulated the petition urging President Obama to take U.S. nuclear missiles off high alert. Joe, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you, Amy.
What do you mean that President Obama, before he leaves office, should take nuclear weapons off high alert? What does this mean? And can Trump reverse this immediately on the first day?
Well, Donald Trump is a policy chameleon. With the exception of a few issues, you don't really know what he thinks. So when he tweets out that he wants to expand U.S. nuclear capability, when he tells a network correspondent that let it be an arms race, you have to worry that he means what he says. You have to worry that a man of this temperament, of this character, might be more willing to use nuclear weapons than any previous president. So there is something that President Obama can do about this to buy us some time. He can end the Cold War practice of keeping our nuclear missiles on high alert, ready to launch in a few minutes' notice. This is something that he pledged to do when he was campaigning, said he would do it when he took office, never did it. He's got 22 days to try and correct that mistake. Yes, President Trump could then come in and reverse it, but that is much harder to do. It'd be very difficult for President Trump to put nuclear missiles on high alert. Why are you doing that? What's the crisis? What's the justification? This is one of those policies that has survived because people haven't looked at it. People haven't questioned it. Why does anyone have the ability to launch nuclear weapons so quickly? In 22 days, Donald Trump will be able to launch nuclear missiles as quickly as he now tweets. 4 minutes after he gives the order, those missiles will fly. No one can stop him. No one can reverse those launches.
Well, I'd like to go back to comments Trump made earlier this year on the risk of nuclear proliferation. During a Republican presidential town hall in Milwaukee, Trump talked about the possibility of other countries acquiring nuclear weapons. He was questioned by moderator CNN's Anderson Cooper.
At some point, we have to say, you know what, we're better off if Japan protects itself against this maniac in North Korea. We're better off, frankly, if South Korea is going to start to protect itself.
Saudi Arabia, nuclear weapons?
Saudi Arabia, absolutely.
You would be fine with them having nuclear weapons?
No, not nuclear weapons, but they have to protect themselves or they have to pay us. Here's the thing. With Japan, they have to pay us or we have to let them protect themselves.
So, but if you say to Japan, yes, it's fine, you get nuclear weapons, South Korea, you as well, and Saudi Arabia says we want them too.
Can I be honest with you? It's going to happen anyway. It's going to happen anyway. It's only a question of time.
That was President-elect Trump speaking earlier this year. So, Joe Cirincione, can you respond to that? Not only the question of high alert, taking the U.S. nuclear missiles off high alert, but also Trump's position on other countries acquiring nuclear weapons.
Yeah, he's wrong on so many levels here. Let's take it apart. First of all, it is not inevitable. There is nothing inevitable about nuclear proliferation. For the last 40 years, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, have had a concerted policy to reduce nuclear weapons in the world. And guess what? It has worked. There are far fewer nuclear weapons in the world now than at the height of the Cold War. We've cut the global arsenals by 80%. More countries have given up nuclear weapons and nuclear programs over the last 30 years than have tried to acquire them. We're down to one rogue state, so-called rogue state, North Korea. That's it. There's nobody else. So there's nothing inevitable about this. Number two, the idea that he would encourage other countries to get nuclear weapons flies in the face of 70 years of U.S. policy. No U.S. president has ever encouraged any country to get a nuclear weapon. Not the United Kingdom, not France, not Israel, our allies. We didn't want them to get nuclear weapons. Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, that is insane. That is starting an arms race. Can you start an arms race with a tweet? Can you start an arms race with this unclear, rambling kind of discourse he has? Yes, you can. President Trump would be able to do this with the stroke of a pen, with a side comment, with another tweet. That's what worries so many people about his getting control of the most capable, the most destructive death machine on the planet, the U.S. nuclear arsenal.
Well, the U.S. and Russia between them have 93% of the world's nuclear arsenal. So if he does accelerate the arms race, what are the prospects for other nuclear weapon states, China, India, Pakistan, who in relative terms have virtually none?
Yes. When you do bar graphs, you see the U.S. column go way high, Russia's column go way high. The other countries with 100 or so nuclear weapons barely register. But when the big guys start talking about building new weapons, and the U.S. is already on a path to spend $1 trillion on new nuclear weapons over the next 25 years, and then expand those arsenals, they're basically telling the other countries, start your engines. What is China going to do? They have about 200 nuclear weapons now. Won't they feel pressure to expand? And then India and Pakistan. You can see the nuclear chain reaction this kind of thing sets off. That's why reversing this 3 decades-long U.S. policy of reducing nuclear weapons is so dangerous. You shouldn't be making nuclear policy on Twitter. It is just not a responsible way for any president, for any individual to behave.
I wanted to turn to comments President Obama made when he was the Democratic presidential nominee in September 2008. The Arms Control Association asked him about his nuclear policy. Among other issues, Obama addressed specifically the risks involved with the U.S. being able to so swiftly launch a nuclear attack. He responded, quote, "Keeping nuclear weapons ready to launch on a moment's notice is a dangerous relic of the Cold War. Such policies increase the risk of a catastrophic accidents or miscalculation. I believe we must address this dangerous situation, something that President Bush promised to do when he campaigned for president back in 2000, but he did not do once in office." Yeah. That is what the candidate Obama said. Did President Obama do this, and what do you think should happen right now?
He did not, but he still has time. He's been making significant policy changes up until this morning, either statements on, for example, Israel, or executive actions to put Arctic drilling sites off limits for new exploration. He can do this. If he's protecting part of the environment, take a step to protect the entire planet. That's why we put this petition up on change.org. As one small step, people can go there, sign it, build public pressure. We're privately trying to communicate to the administration to take this step. And this is because this relic of the Cold War is so totally unnecessary. There is no reason for the President of the United States to be able to push or to give an order. There isn't actually a button to be able to give an order, and 4 minutes later, the nuclear weapons will fly. This was done when we were afraid of a bolt-out-of-the-blue attack from the Soviet Union, hundreds of warheads streaking over the poles, an extremely unlikely scenario. So there's no reason to have this policy now. Even if that were to happen, we have our submarines, we have bombers that are safe, that could retaliate. So you don't need this for any reason. And having this kind of policy greatly exacerbates the risk of an accident. My friend and colleague Eric Schlosser has a brilliant essay in The New Yorker this week about all the accidents we have had, how so often we came very, very close to accidentally launching our missiles because of a computer glitch, a misunderstanding, a misreading. There's no reason to put the world in this kind of peril.
Joe Cirincione, we want to thank you for being with us, President of the Plowshares Fund Global Security Foundation, author of Nuclear Nightmares, Securing the World Before It's Too Late, and Bomb Scare, The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons. We'll link to your Huffington Post piece, Keep Donald Trump's Finger Off the Nuclear Button. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. When we come back, a Cold War story and a request for a pardon of outgoing President Obama. We'll talk about the Rosenbergs. Stay with us.
Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaf and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning.
That's Billie Holiday singing Lewis Allen's song, Strange Fruit. Lewis Allen was the actual name of Abel Meeropol, who's the adopted father of our next guest, Michael Meeropol. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
Two brothers are making a last-ditch appeal to President Obama to clear their mother's name. Michael and Robert Meeropol are calling on Obama to posthumously exonerate their mother, Ethel Rosenberg. She, along with their father, Julius Rosenberg, was charged with sharing nuclear secrets with the Soviet Union and executed on June 19, 1953. At the time, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover accused the couple of committing the crime of the century. This is a clip of a newscast after the Rosenbergs' execution.
Someone had passed America's atomic bomb secrets to Russia. This was an undisputed fact that the whole world knew. The federal government had laid the crime at the doorstep of two native New Yorkers, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. But to the end, they both protested their innocence of the theft. In April of 1951, the federal court of Judge Irving R. Kaufman found the pair guilty as charged and sentenced them to death in the electric chair to pay for their crime of treason.
The government alleged Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, along with Morton Sobel, helped the Soviet Union acquire the secret of the atomic bomb. But supporters say there's no evidence that Ethel Rosenberg took part in espionage. A new report by the Seton Hall School of Law suggests Ethel was used by the government as a pawn for leverage in its attempt to build a case against her husband, Julius. Joining us now, Robert Meeropol, the younger son of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, 6 years old at the time of their execution, author of the autobiography, An Execution in the Family, One Son's Journey. He's also the founder and executive director of the Rosenberg Fund for Children. Robert Meeropol, it's great to have you back on Democracy Now!
Great to be here.
So, I'm sorry I said that Michael was coming in, but I'm glad that you both get along.
Yes.
Your older brother. What exactly are you asking for?
Well, we're asking for an exoneration as opposed to a pardon. First of all, a pardon implies that somebody's guilty. It's a forgiveness for something they did. We know from KGB files and other places that Ethel Rosenberg was never given a code name. So we know that the KGB did not consider her a spy, and she wasn't a spy. So we're not asking for a pardon. Instead, what we're saying is that the trial, the entire trial, was a perversion of justice. The judge and the prosecutor secretly communicated. The prosecution developed this plan to use my mother as a hostage, basically, to use her as a lever to coerce my father into saying what the government wanted him to say. And then the prosecution encouraged the chief prosecution witnesses, David and Ruth Greenglass, the only people who gave information against my mother at the trial, all oral, to invent a story of my mother typing up certain notes from David Greenglass, which never happened. So when Seton Hall took a look and sort of deconstructed this trial in a 26-page, very painstaking report that we did not commission, this was independent, what they basically said was she was used as an afterthought. She was there to coerce cooperation from my father, and that's the only reason they did it. And what's particularly dangerous about this, it's not just about my personal desire to exonerate my mother, to have President Obama, before he leaves office, essentially nullify the verdict in that case against my mother, but instead to demonstrate that if the government is going to create evidence and facilitate the conviction of someone in a capital case for political purposes, this is a threat to civil society. This is the way the judiciary is used in authoritarian societies. It is incompatible with a free and open society. So we're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing it to preserve, I would say, freedom in this country in general, and the right to dissent, because the courts can be used as devastating instruments of repression, as they were during the McCarthy period, and we can fear in the coming years that this may happen again.
Well, there's a direct link between Ethel Rosenberg's fate and incoming President Donald Trump. Trump's longtime lawyer and mentor, Roy Cohn, who was a member of the prosecution team in Ethel's case, who pressured Ethel's brother, David Greenglass, to make up false testimony about his own sister. There was reportedly no other evidence to convict her. He also apparently colluded with the trial judge to predetermine the outcome for both Julius and Ethel, the death penalty. In 1951, Roy Cohn was interviewed aboard the SS New Amsterdam.
The one thing we have to understand at the outset is that the Communist Party is not a political party. It's a criminal conspiracy. Its object is, as has been established by the verdict of a jury, the overthrow of the government of the United States by force and violence as soon as the right time arrives. In the meantime, plans are being made. That day comes, and the Communist Party's most important work is that of espionage in behalf of the Soviet Union, which means that it infiltrates our government, defense plans, every important place possible in order to steal information from us and give it to the Soviet Union.
That was Roy Cohn speaking in 1951. So, Robert Mirapool, could you talk about the role that Roy Cohn played during your mother's trial and what his role has been in Trump's administration or incoming administration?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that. I mean, there's actual television footage. I mean, one of the things about our campaign is that it's not just our claims. We use all the government's material in order to destroy the government's case. And in the Roy Cohn case, there's actually a television interview in which he talks about how he coerced David Greenglass into making up this testimony about my mother's typing. So Roy Cohn can be said to be one of the principal architects of my mother's execution. And he did represent both Donald Trump's father and Donald Trump has said, this is my mentor. He taught me how to respond to attacks. So it's one of the reasons that we're pushing Obama in the last days of his administration, because we know once his administration is over that President Trump is not going to admit that his mentor executed someone who was not a spy for spying. So that's the connection, and we don't think that this is our last chance, at least for the next 4 or 8 years.
Robert Meeropol, you're not asking for your father to be exonerated. So talk about this.
Well, once Morton Sobel, my parents' co-defendant in 2008, essentially said, hey, Julius and I did it. We were engaged. It wasn't the secret of the atomic bomb, but we were engaged in trying to help the Soviet Union defeat the Nazis during World War II. It was electronics. It was other military or information. But at the trial, Julius was accused, essentially, of conspiring to spy, and we now know that he did spy. Now, it's true the trial was just as unfair in his case. He was executed for stealing the secret of the atomic bomb, something he didn't do. But it's a much more subtle claim. It's a much more difficult situation than with my mother, who, again, perhaps the most powerful and simple evidence is the fact that she wasn't given a code name. Well, David Greenglass had a code name. Ruth Greenglass had a code name, right? Julius Rosenberg had a code name. Ethel Rosenberg had no code name. So we know she wasn't a spy. We know the KGB did not consider her a spy. And anybody who claims that she was a spy is essentially saying we know better than the KGB who was a KGB spy, which is a laughable claim if it weren't so tragic.
Well, your brother actually said that your mother, speaking in an interview with 60 Minutes, that your mother, Ethel, was collateral damage of McCarthyism.
And that's right. To use family members to hold them hostage, it's actually what terrorists do. And then, as one of a former Secretary of State Rogers, was quoted as ultimately saying, Ethel Rosenberg called our bluff. In other words, the whole thing was a bluff. Well, that's outrageous. And we can't allow the judicial system to be used in this manner. And I do want to urge one thing I want to emphasize. We're somewhere between 45,000 and 46,000 people on our online petition urging President Obama to do this. I'd love to get to the 50,000 mark. You know, every signature counts, but big numbers are symbolically important.
Noam Chomsky signed, Michael Moore, Yvonne Slur, Kathleen Chalfant, Gina Belafonte, Michael Dukakis, the former governor and presidential candidate.
In some ways, the inspiration for this campaign, because it was his proclamation about Sacco and Vanzetti, the Italian anarchists who were executed in the 1920s by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that could be a model for this presidential proclamation. And it's at the Rosenberg Fund for Children. That's, if you go to their website, really easy website, rfc.org, you're going to go right to the petition.
Well, we have to leave it there now, but you've raised too much in history, so we have to do a part 2 to really go through it and what it meant for you to grow up, you and your brother Michael, with your parents executed, and your fund for helping children of imprisoned people. Thanks so much, Robert Meeropol. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. This is Democracy Now!